The more complicated world problems become, the more important it is for us to do everything possible to simplify our own relationships with life. A tremendous amount of energy is lost in the mere confusion of complication. Even though we may gradually solve whatever the confusion may be, we have used energy and we have used time. And life as we know it is a problem in time and energy. And to achieve the maximum of security and happiness and usefulness, we must try to conserve our resources. We have noticed for the last 25 years how the tempo of life has increased, and the individual has not really been able to adjust to this increase successfully. We realize that in the last 2.5 decades, we have become more and more dependent upon artificial means of vitality support. We have become addicted to every type of vitamin that there is known. We require continual use of stimulant or sedational material, both these indicating that we are not able to cope successfully with the pressure of conditions. The pressure of conditions must also be regarded as a compound of the prevailing confusion. The more confused we become, the more difficult our environment becomes. And the individual confusion finally summarizes itself or masses itself into vast patterns of collective confusion. While it is not possible for us to create any code that we can require others to follow, thus adding to a general simplification, we must, to the best of our ability, prevent ourselves from falling into the prevailing dilemma. Simplification must never be interpreted as compromise. We do not want to simplify things by losing values. We do not want to follow lines of least resistance at the expense of principles. But we do want to, first of all, get our principles straight. The individual who really has an internal organization, whose beliefs are well set, whose ideals are clear to himself, already has a strong defense against the uncertainties of his times. So by simplification, we mean organization of values. That the person decides in his own mind that which he shall do and what he shall not do, what he can do and what he cannot do. And having come to certain clear internal directives, he must learn to apply these directives to the circumstances which arise around him. Thus, simplification is self-leadership over circumstances. It is the individual charting a course and staying on that course. It takes much less energy to stay on a course than it does to find it again after it has been lost. So we try in every way possible to remove useless, valueless, worthless kinds of pressure. Pressures that even if we succeeded in all the things we want to do, or that these pressures invite us to attempt to do, we would probably be very little better off than we are today. So we are not looking for simplification in the giving up of value, but in the clarification of value. We are looking for a way of life in which we recognize what is good and stay with it, not allowing ourselves to be lured into some confused state which is going to require more energy than we can afford to expend. If this is true of all persons, it is especially true of those who are growing older, whose energy supplies are therefore less adequate, and whose lives have become increasingly more burdened. We find as we get older that time moves more rapidly than ever before, that we have less and less time to do the things that we really want to accomplish. Our interests have become richer and fuller. Our responsibilities have increased in number. We are surrounded with more inducements to activity. We are called upon more and more by those who may respect our wisdom or understanding or experience. Therefore, as we go along the road, simplification is the secret of preserving health and vitality for the longest possible period of time. To do all these different things that are necessary to straighten out life, we have to begin with all the minor problems, the ordinary common problems of time, of our time and living. One thing we also learned is that we have a greater skill in handling important critical situations than we have in administering nuisance situations. If we are faced with a major decision in life, it seems as though something comes along and gives us guidance. The major decision calls for all our resources. We gather ourselves together, sit down, and use the best that we know to solve it. The result is that many times the greatest decisions, the greatest changes, the greatest integrations that we achieve take the least energy. We are more or less sure of what we are doing or what is necessary, and we proceed accordingly. The greatest of all wasting factors is that of minor problems. Problems that are not very clear in themselves, that lead to ends that are not very certain. Things which come along as endless minor irritations. Against these we must be ever watchful, because this endless wasting away of small amounts of energy will in the end deplete our major resources. If we study the allotments of body energy as we find these in the human personality, we become aware of nature's intention. And it is, of course, the wisdom of nature that we shall use our energy as wisely as possible, conserve it as much as we can, and never assume for a moment that the resources that we have are unlimited. They are all limited by many problems and many circumstances. The energy allotments of different persons differ. Some individuals seemingly can stand far more burden and responsibility and irritation than others. We have undoubtedly learned from experience something of our own allotment. We find how quickly things tire us, and we gradually learn what kind of things tire us most. And if we make such discoveries, we should put this information away and keep it where we can get at it, because it is the secret of our ability to conserve energy. Ordinarily speaking, we do have, however, enough energy for the things that most need doing. But very often, our energy follows our inclinations rather than our needs. Thus, we do have energy often for projects that are not actually very important. And at the same time, we get a strange sense of fatigue when we are confronted with problems or responsibilities that may be necessary, but which we do not particularly want to assume. Energy follows desire very closely. That is one of the reasons we must guard our energy, because the fulfillment of our desires can often be a very exhausting thing, often impossible in substance, even though we struggle desperately to achieve it. To begin with, then, energy is most wasted perhaps in conflict. Wherever it is possible to remove conflict, either internal or environmental, we are making a major gain. Conflict may arise from situations outside of ourselves, but it may also, and frequently does arise, from within us or from our own reaction to conditions around us. I know more persons who have exhausted a complete life of vitality simply trying or laboring with situations that they have created for themselves, creations of their own mental and emotional pressures, which should never have existed at all. One of the common experiences we have in this field, and of course at this season of the year, it is particularly obvious, and that is the amount of energy we can waste over religious criticism. The amount of energy that we can deplete ourselves of in our worries and anxieties about people whose religious beliefs are different from ours. In families, this can be a very trying and exhausting thing, and a profitless waste of resources. If we could simplify our thinking to this very basic philosophical principle, that a religion is finally a way of life, that an individual is religious who keeps principles, and that above all sectarian considerations must be elevated the fact of conduct. If the individual is keeping the rules of life as wisely, as lovingly, and as skillfully as he knows, we do not need to worry very much about the church he goes to. If he is not keeping these rules, it makes very little difference which church he goes to. He is still in trouble. So we can get out of our minds worries, fears, and anxieties about these abstract things that we cannot do anything about even at best. And yet many persons have ruined their lives worrying about abstract values which they cannot control and about which they have no clear insight even themselves. Another very desperate way of wasting energy is to try to control, dominate other people. The desperate determination to rule the life or activity of others. The resolution to take leadership where this leadership is not required, requested, or desired can also lead to a very serious depletion of resources. Not only do we have the actual energy loss as such, but we have the continual unhappiness, and all forms of unhappiness are debilitating. The individual becomes weakened through the use of energy in the simple process of being miserable. So whatever in life we are doing, if we are miserable about it, it is shortening our lives and injuring our health. We must gradually recognize what nature wants and what nature is trying to tell us from the cradle to the grave. That is, that nature wants us to live at peace with ourselves and others. If we do not achieve this peace, we must pay for it in devitalization in some way. For the absence of peace is discord, and discord uses up energy. All forms of discord deplete and destroy life resources. Nature has never rewarded confusion, except with more confusion. Nature has never allowed the individual to be a dictator or a tyrant without ultimately impoverishing him. And after all, we must recognize that above all codes that we are capable of formulating ourselves is the inevitable code of cause and effect. We see around us the inevitable consequences of action. Therefore, we must keep this basic code. For some reason, man from the beginning has rebelled against this. He has almost always determined in some way to impose his own will upon the face of nature. He wants to do things his way. He assumes that nature does not know what it needs, what it wants, or what it must have. It is up to man to decide these things. So man has gone valiantly and rather arbitrarily along, trying to correct the common mistakes that the infinite has made. This is a hard job. It can use up a great deal of time and energy, peace of mind, and in the long run, man cannot win. It is possible that if all those down through the ages who have tried to impose their own will upon infinite will survived or could now communicate with us from some other bond to which they have gone, we might get some valuable testimony on this problem. But the individual, in his desperate determination to live his own life, finally comes to the end and tips into the grave and is silent, and we never know what his final thoughts are on any subject. We do not know to what degree he may ultimately come into the possession of the understanding of the mistake of his own attitude. But because he perishes without confessing, we do not gain the instruction from him we might otherwise receive. In our daily thinking, then, we begin with the commonest problems of energy conservation. And one of these is the quick, easy, natural acceptance of situations that arise. Acceptance where it is obvious that there are no values more important than acceptance. If we must compromise value in order to accept, then we may pause. But where the project itself is comparatively meaningless, then to accept it easily and naturally and graciously is to save time and energy. We know this in the innumerable small interruptions that come along. These interruptions are not nearly so dangerous or detrimental as the mental and emotional stress of interruption within ourselves. It is very common today for our plans to miscarry. We have something that we intend to do, conditions arise, and it seems unreasonable or difficult for us to do according to our original program. If what we intended to do was of great moral, ethical, spiritual value, then we may accept confusion as the price of achievement. We may realize that in this case we must stand firm against compromise. But there are so few things that we do in life that are that important. Usually confusion is nothing more than the common interferences of an involved social system. And where the problems are of no great meaning, no real vital importance, then our basic solution for them is a quiet acceptance of interruption. The ability, for example, for the individual to experience interruption without his own consciousness being interrupted. The problem of not regretting the things that happened, and not gaining any unreasonable attitude about pressures and circumstances, but quietly accept them and follow the ancient adage or the ancient thought, suffer these things to be so now, they too shall pass away. Things that we graciously and quietly accept do pass away. If they are not important, they do not cause too much concern. But if we become constantly, nervously bound to these interruptions, then the things do not pass away, but we pass away out of the stress, shock, and strain of our struggle with inevitables. Another very wonderful thing to help us along the path of simplification is a sense of humor. The individual who can laugh off minor problems, who can suddenly recognize the ridiculousness of the situations and of his own involvement in them, who can suddenly realize that these things are simply not important, that they're all a little ridiculous. will often find a great deal of release if he can learn to laugh at himself. One of the great causes of debility in this world is that we take ourselves too seriously. Take the things that we do with such tremendous sense of self-importance that we wear out even contemplating this self-importance. We just are unable to quietly go along the course of years. We have to fight things. Too many things that we have, too many projects that we try to carry, too many attitudes that we desperately cling to have little more than nuisance value. They never will amount to anything. They become simply habitual reactions. And we develop many negative attitudes simply by habit. We no longer really regard the values or the factors. We always have reacted in a certain way, so we always will. We have always wasted time and energy, so we keep right on doing it. We do not realize that there are many nuisance situations that we never need to be part of. These nuisance situations may seemingly be important to other people, but if they are not important to all concerned, they are not basically valuable. So we can look for ways of reducing nuisance. And one of the basic ways of achieving this end is to simplify ways of life, to simplify the way we live. The individual who is living outside of simplicity as far as his own problems are concerned is simply contributing to his own premature end. The person, for example, who living alone lives in a very large house is simply asking for exhaustion. He is trying to maintain some kind of a social front or something of that nature, or has become accustomed to the idea that he has to live this way. But he is paying for it. He is paying for it with energy. Whereas if he would simplify his arrangements, he would do a great deal to save time and energy. In old days, when it was possible to maintain a serving class, perhaps this large house provided employment for many people. Today, it merely provides exhaustion for the owner. There is simply no need for this type of thing. Arrange your life so that there is nothing wasted in the form of life resources. Now, in the simplification of this type of thing, we can preserve what is truly meaningful. No one wants to suggest that anyone gives up things that they really want or that they really regard as necessary or valuable. But we may hope that some people will learn to re-educate their sense of values, that they will gradually learn not to hold on to things, not to want things which are in themselves useless. It is much better to clear this entire situation before it makes life increasingly complicated for ourselves. Another problem is that no matter how much worldly goods we store up, we are apt to store up still more emotional and mental baggage. This also can be totally useless. First of all, it may relate to things which are uniquely of this world. Therefore, we're not going to be able to take them with us anyway. And any thoughts or emotions that we cannot take with us are no more valuable than physical goods that we cannot take with us. We haven't spoken to a certain relative for 20 years, and every time we think of them, we become so depleted we have to take a new vitamin pill. We might as well get over this now. We might as well realize that unless the things we carry in our thoughts and emotions are good enough to live with in eternity, they're not good enough to live with here today. By gradually relaxing away from these pressures, we achieve a great deal of good for ourselves. People will say, however, that we can't give up these feelings. We have them. We've had an antagonism for half a lifetime. How are we suddenly going to get over it? We can get over it, but we can only get over it by outgrowing it. We can only get over it if somewhere along the line a little flash of insight occurs within ourselves by which our own attitude is basically changed. We cannot get over despising someone if we really continue to loathe them. There's no answer here. But if we gradually realize behind this situation the uselessness of our own attitude, if it dawns on us that we are only wasting energy, and that actually, if the other person doesn't like us and really wishes us to have a bad time in life, there's no better way that he can accomplish this than to hope that we will keep on hating him. Because if we do this, we will ruin our lives, but we may not ruin his in any way. So we have to give up these things, otherwise we give all authority to our adversary. We achieve the very ends which someone who dislikes us might hope we will come to. And that is, we will ruin our own happiness. So in order to rescue ourselves from such dilemmas, we have to sit down and think and feel beyond them. We have to get over them as forces in our own consciousness. One way to find a great new vitality is suddenly to awaken and realize that we have accepted life, that we have accepted people as they are. We have not demanded the impossible. We have not built from a wrong philosophy which caused us to expect the impossible. We have not endowed them with virtues which they never possessed, nor have we endowed them with vices which are exaggerated beyond any reasonable degree. We have finally adjusted to the circumstances of life. We realize that other people will have their own thoughts whether we like it or not, and we stop trying to react violently to the thinking of any other person. Another problem that arises with simplification is that simplicity is closely related to beauty. Wherever true beauty exists, we observe law and order. And we notice that nature, in the presentation of beauty, follows very definite canons and laws. That beauty is something which is perhaps most clearly revealed through simplicity. Therefore, that everywhere in life, the dignity of living, the happiness of living, the beauty of living, these are related to simplicity. And I know a good many cases where persons are simply overwhelmed by what they have. They are insignificant, unimportant human beings living in the midst of significance and importance which is not really their own. Things they have bought, things they have accumulated. The individual who has very little actual quality in his own soul, trying to get a certain reflected glory from the fact that he owns a $500,000 painting. And in the desperate effort to have things make us important, we go into debt, we become overwhelmed with possessions, we gain too many responsibilities, we may even assume too much debt in the desperate effort to have things build us up. The fact of the matter is they do the exact reverse. For when people see us against this tremendous tapestry of things, our own insignificance becomes only more apparent. This process of trying to constantly redecorate a home every few months, this endless irritation in which the person feels himself out of place among his own possessions, is another form of exhaustion. It wears us out trying to compete with things or possessions which are not suited to us. So we find that the wise person, the thoughtful person, the intelligent person simplifies his environment, but does so graciously, so that in the end he will have that which best reveals him, best sustains him, not that which at any time or for any reason overwhelms him. If he is overwhelmed, he is lost. And too many people today are overwhelmed. In fact, the whole world is overwhelmed by the physical situations that have arisen. Man is getting lost in the universe of his own achievements. Man is no longer able to use his background properly. It has moved into the foreground and destroyed him. This conflict does cause nervousness, tension, unhappiness, and I know many people have been made very ill by it. So we take hold of these situations and we try to the best of our ability to handle them more intelligently and more valuably for all concerned. In the process of simplification, we have to realize also that exactitude is a great labor saver. There are many ways of approximating something, but nearly all trial and error methods result in exhaustion of resource. The individual who knows exactly what he is doing can do it quickly. The individual who knows exactly what he means can say it simply. But the person who is not quite sure must drown his uncertainties in a sea of words. So always the individual who gains a certitude of realization within himself can do things simply. When we know exactly what is necessary, we can achieve this end with a minimum of effort on our own part. But when we are not sure, we must try too hard. We must work too long. We must correct too many mistakes that we ourselves make as we go along. And all of this is energy wasting, resource destroying. As we become more and more nervous and tense under the pressure of circumstances, if we do not have resources within ourselves, we have to develop excessive escape mechanisms. The individual who reaches a degree of tension in which he must be at something every minute gradually destroys all of his energy resources. It takes energy to drive a freeway. It takes energy to activate any social project of importance. It takes energy to entertain friends. It takes energy to go out and be entertained by other friends. The energies required for the various social activities of life today are so excessive that it means that we must think these things through very carefully and decide what we really want to do. To do those things which best express and best reveal our own basic needs. So the person who finds it necessary to constantly escape or extrovert from some pressured situation that has arisen within himself must begin to study the conservation of his own resources. To do this, he must begin to eliminate useless activities. One of the most important of all basic attitudes is to simplify our wants, to bring them within a pattern of graciousness and at the same time a pattern of practicality. Competitive wanting is one of the dangers of our time. The individual wants too many things, and having them, he has to live with them, and they gradually exhaust him. One thing to do, perhaps, is to divide our belongings and possessions into the kind of things that help us and the kind of things that hurt us. Let us get rid, first of all, of the things that hurt. Because pain, is an energy-destroying thing. Not only do we lose energy from pain, but we lose energy from the fact that nature has to throw more energy in to help us to recover from the pain. So we lose both ways. So look around you. If you have things around you that are associated with negative attitudes, negative thoughts, negative reactions, get rid of them. Get rid of things that cause you a negative response by their very existence. Even though you may cherish them, even though you may regard them as valuable, pass them on to other people who perhaps can enjoy the things because they do not have the personal association factors which make these things dangerous to you. In the development of private philosophies, we are apt to get into the danger of complexity. We are liable to have 2 or 3 different systems of belief that do not agree, but we like them all. Therefore, at one time or another, we try to apply them all. And because they do not work together, we frequently create confusion, which would not be true if we had integrated our own concepts in the first place. One of the most important elements in the simplification of life is, therefore, the clarification of our religious philosophical principles. We have to have them in a way that we can understand them. If we do not understand them clearly, we will misunderstand them continuously. If they are not understood also, they do not have a dynamic for us. When we have a mass of beliefs which are but poorly digested, none of them really serve us. We find our memories being used to perpetuate these beliefs rather than to gain courage from them. If we have to defend beliefs, we are in trouble, because a belief which we have only understood to the degree that we have to defend it is not serving us. We are soldiering for it. Actually, the things that are true need no defense. They cannot be assailed. No individual has to ever defend a principle. All he has to do is exemplify it, and this saves a tremendous amount of energy. Also, where we find that other people do not agree with our principles, do not see things our way, we frequently go on to the energy defensive. We try to force their understanding. We do it with the best meaning in the world. We want them to be better people. We know they're in trouble and we'd like to get them out of trouble. But it usually ends up by our getting into the trouble. We cannot force enlightenment. We cannot press insight upon another person. And if we try at all, if there is any hope of success or any hope of contributing anything, it must be on the level of absolute simplicity. The individual must use only the simplest of his faculties to understand this with. If we can get our thoughts so very straight and so very simple, perhaps we might reach him in part. But the more complicated our ideas are, the more certainly he will never be able to understand them. In the same particular problem, we have to decide in our own minds what we can use out of wisdom. There are many great principles in life which we can learn, but we can never use them. It is far better for us to admit they exist and not spend too much time on them. Because if we spend too much time on them, we will never have any time to use the principles that we do have need to apply in our daily lives. So never allow abstractions, never allow vast cosmic problems to become so important that we have no time to do the things that immediately need doing. So I think it is quite true what the mystic has found out and what we find in Zen and certain other philosophies, that namely the experiences that we need to have in the form of insight come to us very simply and very naturally if we will relax. It is true that we need a basic pattern of law. It is true that perhaps every individual in the course of a lifetime should have a conviction that is based upon, we might say, 300 or 400 hours of fairly careful thinking. During the course of a lifetime, this is not too much. It means that we have gradually come to certain principles by which we are not going to be deceived or overwhelmed by the superstitions around us. But having gotten our principles straight, I think we come very close to this problem in following the concepts taught by Buddha. Namely, that we are not to go off into this infinite consideration of abstraction, but we are to take all knowledge that is available to us and apply it immediately to the problem of our own existence. Unless we solve something in ourselves, our knowledge is vain. Therefore, we need only that much abstract knowledge as is necessary to create a practical, concrete pattern that is suitable to protect us from common error and to keep our minds and hearts and natures dedicated fairly closely to the essential principles of daily existence. So that energy says that we can't afford too much abstraction. So we do realize the importance of keeping learning within the range or area of things that can be done with it, and never permit it to simply exist completely for its own sake. If we could do the same thing with the common daily knowledge that we have, we could finally end by conserving resources through using knowledge. When we use so much energy getting the knowledge, we have practically no resource left with which to apply it. So this is something that every student should bear in mind, namely that to get the principles clear and then apply them simply to simple, normal objectives of life.